few years ago, I made my first and as of yet only trip to Andalus because I wanted to go and visit the beautiful architecture that the Muslims who had ruled over Spain for 700 years had left. And I read the standard books on Andalusian history. I read about all of the various dynasties, the Khulafa, and I thought I was very well prepared. And towards one of the final days of my trip, I only had 2 days left, and I was in the grand city of Granada, the very grand city of Granada. Some of you I'm sure have been there. And I was at the palace where the last Nasirid Khalifa handed the keys of the city to Ferdinand and Isabella. And those actual keys were still there, and I saw those as the actual key that was handed by the last Khalifa in 1492. He handed the keys of the city to Ferdinand and Isabella. And as I'm taking my guided tour, so the lady said, and right over there stood Christopher Columbus. And all of a sudden it struck me, 1492. It's not a coincidence that the end of one era happened to be the beginning of another. The end of the Muslim dynasty in Spain was the beginning of the Spanish, quote-unquote, discovery of the New World. And I had done all the research for the Muslims of Spain. And I didn't at all do any research before I went of the Christians post-1492. And I said, Christopher Columbus was standing right there. There's a statue of him. Yeah, she was standing right there. So I said, what was he doing here? Because I never did the research about what was he doing here. And so she explained to me that Christopher Columbus had been petitioning Ferdinand and Isabella multiple times for money to finance his scheme to go find this land or this trade route to India. And she said, in fact, an hour and a half's drive away, you can actually visit the very monastery where he stayed before he undertook the actual journey, where he actually took off. The 3 ships went from that particular place, and it's called La Vida. You can actually go there. And I was so astounded, and of course, being an American, I was like, wow, I need to go to this monastery. Changed my plans, I scrapped a few other things, I said, I'm going to drive there. I had to rent a car, I drove all the way to this place, small little village in town, right on the coast of Spain, called La Vida. Right, and GPS, amazing what GPS gets you. You found this little monastery right in the middle of nowhere, and I walked in, and apparently they don't have too many visitors. When the ticket lady saw me, and of course I am, mashallah, the bearded and whatnot, she became very excited. And she said, you're Muslim? Speaking in Spanish, you're Muslim? I said, yeah, alhamdulillah, I'm Muslim. She started speaking in Spanish, and I said, I'm sorry, I'm from Texas, but I don't speak Spanish, I'm sorry, It says, I speak Urdu, but no Spanish, So she tried to explain in broken English that this monastery, La Mosque, used to be a mosque. And this city, La Vida, she said, it's Arabic. I said, La Vida, Ar-Rabita. Ar-Rabita. The city was Ar-Rabita. And I'm not making this up, you can still go there to this day. You can Google it yourself. It's on Google, it's got to be right, obviously. So it must be on Wikipedia as well, so it's right. So you find out that Christopher Columbus was actually living in a converted mosque, and she actually was so excited to see a Muslim. She took me inside, she's a ticket lady. She took me inside, giving me a tour herself, and said, look, this was where the mihrab was. You see the Qibla, the Makkah direction, and of course you could see that it had been walled up. She showed me the minaret. There used to be a minaret chopped off and a cross placed there, and you could see the difference in architecture. And subhanAllah, it really occurred to me, I visited the very room, apparently this very same desk, that's what they say, that he was using, 1492, it's still there because they preserved it. And subhanAllah, the connection really was shown to me then. That's the beginning of the end of one era really was the beginning of another. And we can quite honestly say that the discovery of America was quite literally financed by the money of the Nasirid Kingdom of Spain, i.e. Muslim money. And the technology that Christopher Columbus used, because obviously it was the Arabs who had perfected seafaring, and the navigational tools and the maps and all of this. There is a huge role that Islam played really in the discovery of the quote-unquote discovery, because again, there were many people living here, the European discovery of America. So, subhanAllah, America and Islam are not two distinct independent identities. Muslims had a stake here in this land from the very beginning. Now it is true, let's be honest here, that there were not mass migrations of Muslims, in the 1700s and the 1600s. And that is because, if we know a little bit about American history, who came to America in the 1600s? It was people who were fleeing religious persecution, right? Strands of Christianity that were not accepted in mainstream Europe. So they're fleeing for religious protection. They're fleeing because of persecution. So most of the people that came to America in the 1600s, the Puritans and whatnot, they're fleeing from persecution. Now the fact of the matter is, and we're not painting utopic past, but the reality is, that type of persecution did not exist in the Muslim lands. Muslims didn't need to flee anywhere, and even minorities were living in Muslim lands. The immigrations were from Europe, not from Muslim lands. And by the way, I'm not making this up. One of the intellectual founders, really, of the American thought, which is Jonathan Locke. He's a Scottish political scientist. A lot of his writings form the basis of the Constitution. Even though he never lived to see America, he was in the 1600s. Our founding fathers, all of them, read Locke. And Locke has a letter called A Treatise Concerning Toleration. And again, you can read this letter. And in it, he uses the Ottoman Caliphate as a role model, as an example for religious tolerance. John Locke is using the Ottoman Empire as an example of religious tolerance. Take that, ISIS, right? He's using the Ottoman Empire as an example of religious tolerance, saying, why can't Europe be like this, where everybody can worship as he or she sees fit without the government getting involved and enforcing their ideology on others? So yes, the fact of the matter is, we did not have mass migrations of Muslims in the 1700s because frankly, there was no religious reason to, there was no political reason to, there was no economic reason to. People came to America because lives were tough, because of the potato famine of Ireland, because of very difficult situations. American life in the 1700s was not a piece of cake. It was very difficult. So the only people that came here were one of two reasons. Well, I'm going to add a third one soon. One of two reasons. Number one, religious persecution. Number two, economic hardship. Well, the Muslim lands neither had religious persecution, nor did they really suffer from economic hardships. Therefore, the first wave of mass immigration did not occur voluntarily. Muslims had no need to leave their lands for religious or financial reasons. The first wave of immigration was forced immigration. And I mean, of course, the slaves. 20% at least of the slaves that came to America were Muslim. And I'm sure many of you have heard the stories. Those of you that haven't, really this is an important part of Islamic American history. Frankly, it is the main building block of early Islam. 20% of the slaves that were brought to this country were Muslim. And we have plenty of documented evidence, of eyewitness accounts that were written down, of copies of the Quran, of books of law that were written from memory by the African slaves. The Smithsonian, and I've seen some of these myself, the Smithsonian has a specific exhibit for the Qurans and the Arabic manuscripts written by the slaves. And there's plenty of documented evidence for that. However, unfortunately, these slaves were not able to practice their religion and preserve it amongst their children because obviously they were persecuted, they were dispersed. So Islam died out from slavery and from the descendants of slaves. However, this is probably the number one cause of a revival in the early 19th and 20th century of an Islamic consciousness, of movements like the Lost Foundation of Islam, like the NOI, like the Moorish Science Temple, a number of Islamic movements or pseudo-Islamic movements with ideologies that maybe mainstream Muslims wouldn't agree with, but nonetheless there are Islamic vocabulary. There's Allah, there's the Quran, there's Ramadan, there's Mecca. There's some type of Islamic vocabulary being used, and as we all know the history, and subhanAllah, I'm speaking in Chicago, which was the base of the Nation of Islam, where Elijah Muhammad preached for I think over 35 years, if I'm not mistaken, here in Chicago, where tens of thousands of people converted to the Nation of Islam, and then with the coming of Waliddin, his son, from the nation they came to mainstream Islam, and to this day 1/3 of American Muslims are from that African American experience, and we cannot ignore or trivialize their experiences. They are a part and parcel of our broader American ummah. Frankly, they are the most indigenous American Muslims that we have. And we cannot ignore the fact that the collective memory of what the slaves slaves went through must have been passed down and preserved. And alhamdulillah, there's a massive revival in our times amongst the African American community. And it was only when the economic situation began to turn in the Muslim lands, when Muslims began to immigrate as actual immigrants. So the first wave of immigration occurred at the end of the 19th century, 1890s onwards, from certain parts of Syria and Lebanon, where many Arabs came, probably around 20,000. It wasn't a massive amount, it wasn't a small amount either, and alhamdulillah, their descendants to this day, they founded the first mosques. To this day, I mean, I'm sure in this audience as well, there are people who are from that generation. But what happened was, after 1917, the American government legislated a decree that basically forbade immigration from certain countries. They called it the Yellow Act, and this is something you should look up as well, the Yellow Act. And the Yellow Act was actually meant to prevent Chinese immigrants. There was this racist mentality that the Chinese, why they called it the Yellow Act, with the racist terminology. The Yellow Act was passed, and it was meant to target the Chinese. They had this feeling that the Chinese are going to come and overtake America. So that indirectly prohibited Middle Eastern and Arab people from immigrating as well. And this act was only repealed by Ted Kennedy in the mid-60s. And that was when the massive immigration occurred from Muslim lands, which most of us in this audience are a part and parcel of. My own father is a stereotypical example. One of the earliest immigrants, Pakistani immigrants to Houston, Texas, 1963, comes as a young student doing his master's, and he thinks he's just going to study for a few years and come back. Yeah, right? We all know where that went, right? So he came here thinking quite literally do a master's, maybe a PhD, and then go back to Pakistan. One thing leads to another. He gets married, brings my mother here. My brother was a young boy at the time. I was born here. And here's the point here, that their generation, and we are seeing, mashallah, tabarakallah, many of you in this audience from that generation, their generation were forced to take on a role that they never thought about, they never envisioned. My father didn't come as some type of Muslim cleric or Islam preacher. That wasn't his goal. Let's be honest here. His goal was to educate, to have a better life, get an education, and go back home. As the months turned into years and the years turned into decades and his children were born here, he realized he needed to preserve his identity, his religion, his legacy for his children. So he started the first mosque, which is now, alhamdulillah, ISGH, the largest network in Houston. Over 40 mosques are under ISGH. He was the founder, one of the founders of ISGH back in the late 60s. And the first Sunday school. My father had no clue how to go around building mosques, how to run a Sunday school, but they had to stand up for the sake of us, for our sake. This is their children, their progeny, and so they have to do whatever they can do. And subhanAllah, I grew up in a time and generation in the 80s where, honestly, we didn't have a vision for the future. We were not thinking about what are we going to do for the next generation, for the future of Islam in North America. We were blissfully, naively unaware. And one incident changed all of that, and that is, of course, 9/11. 9/11 was such a shock to all of us, a wake-up call to all of us, that we have some serious issues and problems that we're going to be facing. And subhanAllah, the fact of the matter is that I think this incident caught all of us unawares. But the one thing that it did do, it galvanized us, it mobilized us. It made us realize that, you know what? This is our land. And we have a stake in the future of our own country and community. And we have to come together and make sure that our children and their children after us are not alienated. They're not made to feel like second-rank citizens. That just because of one incident, an entire group or religion is not smeared. And for the first time, so many bridges were built within the Muslim community. And we're still building those bridges now. For the first time, political activism actually came on the table. I mean, I was a young man in my 20s when 9/11 happened. Many of you, alhamdulillah, are older than me. You know as well as I do, there was no political activism back in the 80s, and that was really frowned upon. Nobody really cared that much. It was just mind your own business, live apolitical, pacifist life, just vote for Jumu'ah, and that's about it. And 9/11 really changed all of that. And subhanAllah, as we're seeing the recent events in the Middle East, the ISIS crisis, Al-Qaeda, all of these movements, the smearing of our religion and faith, our own youngsters frighteningly becoming attracted to this ideology and leaving, we all realize this is our collective responsibility. And the problem is we're between a rock and a hard stone. We're between two extremes. On the one hand, there's this narrative that Fox News and the far right continues to spew. And that is that the inherent problem is the religion itself. It is the Quran. You know, Bill Maher and the recent escapade and all that's happening with his show, that Islam is inherently evil and violent. All religions are bad, he says, but Islam is especially evil. And you have people on the far left, Bill Maher, and people on the right, Fox News, actually joining hands in this smearing of our religion. And on the other hand, you have the actual extremists and radicals who are feeling alienated, who don't feel a part of this society. And all of us in this room, and I'm preaching to the choir here, but we all know that the real cause of radicalization is not the Quran. It's not the teachings of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We all know that the real cause of radicalization are political issues that are expressed in the language of religion. What's really enraging these young men and women here and overseas are political causes. But these people, all of us, are religious people. So we express our political grievances in a religious language. What's making them angry and whether those grievances are legitimate or not is a separate issue. Because we all agree that the response to those grievances is illegitimate. We all agree how they're responding to those grievances is illegitimate. But whether those grievances are legitimate or not is a separate issue. But we all know that the root cause of this radicalization, the root cause of the appeal of these movements is because from their perspective, they have a set of angers, a set of injustices that they feel they are fighting on behalf of. From their perspective, they are fighting for their own version of freedom, from their perspective. And frankly, if you look at what's happening in Bashar al-Assad, Syria, and all of this, you can understand the anger, the violence. They are seeing the anger and violence around them, and then they're translating it in their own lives. And we all know as well that mosques are not a place of radicalization. No, quite the contrary. Radicalization occurs outside of the mosques. We want our youth to come to the mosques, because we know if they're active with the mosque, if they're a part of the society and community, they will actually feel at home. Radicalization occurs online, in chat forums, in internet scholars, and Wikipedia, and Google, and YouTube. That's where radicalization occurs. Unfortunately, our Department of Justice, our FBI, unfortunately, they really think that it's the mosques that have radicalization. All of us who go to the mosques, I say it's the exact opposite. That because the mosques are so terrified of being political at all, because they don't allow talk of any grievances, our youth feel alienated expressing themselves, expressing their frustration, expressing their anger in the mosque. In fact, if anybody says anything about anything, they'll be told, no, we don't talk like this, you go somewhere else. Well, if we're going to ban them to talk about their grievances inside our gatherings, if they can't come to our ulama, our clerics, our imams, they're going to find clerics online in faraway lands. They're going to find other people that sympathize with that version of Islam. And the fact of the matter, and let me be very radical here, it is a fundamental mistake of our government and our masjids to criminalize free speech. It is a fundamental error to stigmatize somebody who wants to criticize the foreign policy of this land. Because when you stigmatize that criticism, when you stigmatize it, what are you doing? You're simply putting a lid on it publicly. They're going to go vent privately in places we cannot control. Our government needs to understand that the best way forward and their best allies in the fight against radicalization are Muslim leaders, Muslim clerics, Muslim mosques, masjids. This is their best ally when it comes to actually fighting radical Islam. Don't make us the enemies when we are your best defense against that type of thought. Unfortunately, what happens is that by criminalizing religiosity, by casting Muslims and Islam as being suspicious, our young men and women actually feel even more alienated. And we in the masjid are helping that alienation. Why? Because we don't allow that freedom of expression. We don't, and this is unfortunately, again, a serious issue that I can attest to as well because I'm very active online. That our youth say, we go to our imams, we go to our sheikhs, they don't listen to us. They don't listen. When we express our concerns, oh no, this is too dangerous, don't talk about this. SubhanAllah, here's the point. Our religion and our constitution and nationality tell us the same thing.
we are obliged to speak the truth to whomever it may be. And if that truth happens to be the government power, then so be it. Our religion tells us that the greatest jihad is what? To speak the truthful word to a tyrannical government and regime. And I'm not saying our government is quoting the hadith. The hadith is, the greatest jihad is what? To speak the truth in front of somebody of power. And what does our Constitution and our American heritage tell us? What is the First Amendment? What is the fundamental right of this country? What makes America so different and yet so great compared to every other country? That it is indeed a land of the free. I don't have to agree with American foreign policy to be an American. I don't have to toe the party line to be patriotic. Quite the contrary. Because I am angry at specific foreign policy, because I care about my country. Because I care about my country, I will not stand for injustice in Palestine, in Iraq, in drone bombings, in Syria, anywhere in the world. Because I'm an American, and because I'm a Muslim, I will speak the truth to whomever it may be. And our problem comes when we criminalize it legally or we criminalize it religiously. What's going to happen? You can't be an American if you criticize foreign policy. SubhanAllah. What backwardness is this? Just because I disagree with the tactic of my government, with the policy of my government, this means I'm somehow a fifth column? This is ridiculous. And our masjids have to take the charge in this, allow open spaces. You have your grievances, come air them. And then we need to change the narrative. You see, the grievances that I have are grievances that are mine, because these are my taxpayer dollars. These are my representatives. This is my country. This is not a situation of us versus them. We need to rephrase the narrative. This is my foreign policy that is being financed by my tax dollars, that are being paid by my money, and I'm not going to stand for it. So when we change the narrative and we complain within the system, as a part of the system, we tell our youngsters, you're angry? Excellent. We want you to be angry. Your heart is burning, your heart is full of grief because of what's happening in Palestine and Syria. It's a sign of Iman. It's a sign of humanity that you feel this way. But now, be a Muslim and be an American and cause a positive change in a proactive manner, in a manner that is Islamic, in a manner that is useful. And subhanAllah, here is the reality. How do you think any other legislation, any other change occurs? You know, one of the best examples for us as American Muslims is the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement. The civil rights movement, do you think this was a movement that the elite wanted, that the 1% wanted? Do you think this was a movement that the government was pleased with in the 50s and 60s? Did they not hose down the protesters? Did they not send dogs? Did they not throw tear gas? Did they not jail? Did they not harass Martin Luther King? Did they not do what they did? But when you kept on, when they kept on preaching, when they kept on getting mass support, eventually the government has to couple in. Why? Because the truth always wins over the falsehood in the end. And what was happening with racism and with bigotry is something that is un-Islamic and unethical. So when we preach the truth, what is happening with the drones, with Guantanamo, with Abu Ghraib, what is happening in Palestine, when we keep on preaching in a civil manner, in an appropriate manner, in the end, this is our Islamic theology, and this is what history teaches us. In the end, truth always prevails over falsehood and evil. And this is the reality. But we need to be preaching the truth in a manner that is Islamic, that is conducive, that is healthy for the future of our generation. And my dear brothers and sisters, I think this is really one of the key points that we can help in the de-radicalization effort. Of course, there are other points as well of them, things that I'm doing and other people, to take on the theological message of ISIS, to break it down bit by bit, and that's a bit more advanced for those who actually read their literature. They need a literature to refute them. But at the base level, if we allow an outlet for our disenfranchised young men and women to feel productive, to feel they are bringing about a change, causing a positive effort in the community, inshallah ta'ala, that will help diffuse the situation greatly. Now, I don't want to go on and on. I have 3 points and action plans for all of us here, inshallah ta'ala, and I'm very honored that CGIC has invited me to speak to such a broad array of groups. So from my humble experiences, and many of you are older and wiser than I am, but inshallah this is generic wisdom everybody will benefit from. I want to remind myself and all of you of a 3-point action plan that is especially necessary for cities and communities to do. Number 1, D for diversification. Diversify. What do I mean by diversify? Muslims need to take charge in getting involved with many different activities, many different professions, many different careers. SubhanAllah, here we are encouraging our children always to become only engineers or doctors and maybe lawyers or accountants, but that's about it, right? Within this you have to choose. And of course we have that frame of mind that we want to be stable in our careers and whatnot. But let me ask you, who is the single most famous American Muslim ever of history? Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali. He is the single Muslim that is the most beloved and the most popular of all Muslims, right? He wasn't an engineer or a doctor. And yet his impact is much more. And we keep on talking about media, about politics. Well, who's going to go into those professions if we don't want our own children to go in? And this is a narrative that has to change from within each and every household. You and I, we need to start teaching our children that whatever profession you want to do, don't just limit them to the 2 or 3 that we feel are financially stable. We need to think long term. We need Muslims in every and any field. Because that's when they will give back to the society and country. Not just, it's very proud, it's very nice that 10% of doctors in America are Muslim. This is a statistic survey done. 10%, 1 out of every 10 doctors. By the way, that's the national average. In Chicago, it's probably 93%. But nationally speaking, 10% of doctors are Muslim. That's great, alhamdulillah. But then we need representation in every field. So D for diversification. And especially the one field that I am very passionate about is the field of Islamic scholarship. With all respect to our ulama and imams, and I'm one of them, with all respect to them, and they've done a lot, and I don't mean to dismiss or criticize, but alhamdulillah, we needed them in the 70s and 80s to come here and teach us. My first Maulvi Sahab and Imam was Pakistani, came here in 1979, one of the first Imams of America. Okay, alhamdulillah. But for how long are we going to outsource and import Islamic scholarship? Islam never flourished in a land until that land began to produce its own scholars. We need to have ulama and imams, with all respect to those who have done, because they built the foundation. Now we need to take it on. The torch is passing on. We need to have ulama and imams who speak English as a mother language, who understand the community and culture, who can communicate the issues and problems because they've lived those issues and problems. And the only way to get such imams, where are they going to come from? They're my children and your children. If you're not going to encourage your children to think about Islamic scholarship, if you're going to be dismissive, don't become imam, if you're going to do that, then what's going to happen? What's going to happen? And wallahi, my dear brothers and sisters, one of the main reasons of radicalization is because our youth don't have imams they can connect with. I'm being very blunt here. Our youth do not have imams that are brave enough, bold enough that they can connect with. So when those imams are not worthy of their connection, they'll go online. And they'll find people in some chat rooms and forums and whatnot and connect with them. We need imams, and not just for the radicalization, even more. I mean, frankly, radicalization is a very small problem percentage-wise, probably 0.1% or 0.01%. Our bigger problem is the same problem that Christians and Jews and all religions are happening, and that is our children are simply leaving the faith, right? That's the biggest problem. That is a problem that is in the double digits. How many youth are simply not even coming for Jumu'ah? How many youth just don't care? Apathy. And that's the standard problem of all religions. Well, guess what? The only way after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to save them is to bring forth a leadership that they can actually connect to bring forth a clergy, an imam, an alim that can actually address their challenges in their language. And I can give you a million and one examples. We don't have time for that. You want stories? Come to me, I'll tell you stories. You want stories? I'll tell you the problems of what are happening in this land. But the point is, we need to encourage from within. So number one, D for diversification. Number two, U for unification. I just said diversification. What do I mean by unification? Unification is something that's happening right in this room. Unification is something that's happening right in this room. But we need more than this. Alhamdulillah, the bridges have begun to be built in different ethnic communities. The ummah is global, the ummah is universal. We all praise that, that's great. But the fact of the matter is we still have Bengali masjids, Pakistani masjids, Arab masjids, African American masjids. We still have inner city masjids and suburbia masjids. And Islam has to be connected. Islam has to be connected. Alhamdulillah, things are moving, but too slowly. Ethnically, there has to be more unity, and more importantly than just even ethnically, politically and ideologically, there has to be more unity. Brothers and sisters, one of our biggest problems, wallahi, one of our biggest problems is sectarianism. And not just between Sunnis and Shias. Within Sunnism, mashallah, we used to say there were 73 groups within Islam. Within Sunnism, there are 73 groups these days as well. And each one of them is content with what they're doing. Let me be brutally honest here. If the Salafi and the Sufi cannot get along, if the Deobandi and the Barelvi cannot shake hands, if all of these different strands cannot just come together and cooperate for the sake of the greater good, then what's going to happen? Well, I understand. I am a theologian. I am from my own background. But at the end of the day, there are times and places where we have to just agree to disagree. And there are times and places that, okay, we teach theology, we're going to teach what we believe. Fine. We need to be mature enough to have a dialogue where we retain what we believe is important. I'm not trivializing, there are some major differences, like in Christianity between the various sects, like in Judaism. In Islam, we have some big differences. We're not going to surmount those differences, but we need to learn to cooperate in some areas, maybe not at all, in some areas for the greater good, for the future of preserving our Islam. And that means cooperation always means compromise. Every group is going to have to swallow its pride on some issues. The Deobandis, the Salafis, Al-Maghrib, Zaytuna, all of them are going to have to learn to just swallow a little bit for the greater good. And this applies to all movements, because in the end of the day, there is strength in numbers. In the end of the day, the differences between these movements, try explaining them to a non-Muslim. And he's going to be scratching his head saying, what, really? Just because you pray here and they pray there, you're actually having two different masjids? 8 rakat, 20 rakat. Can you understand how ludicrous these issues are outside of our community? And they are. So for the greater good, we need to learn to compromise and cooperate, unify, especially for political causes. There is strength in numbers, and in the end of the day, this country is a democracy, and it is about numbers. And the third point, so we have diversification, we have unification, and by the way, it's great that we're having a dinner here, but we need more than just annual dinners, and I'm sure that our leaders will agree with this. A dinner is great, but we need more activism that is showing unity. And then number 3 is activism. Number 3 is being proactive, being engaged as a part of the society. And here's the point, I remember growing up in the late 70s, early 80s, our imams would sometimes make fun of us. I say, if we did something, wearing certain things, saying something, man, tum to American ban gaye, you guys are all American now. Because they couldn't understand our version of Islam. Now that I'm older, I would like to respond back and say, of course I'm an American. What did you expect? I was born and raised here. Why is that a slur? Why is that something negative? Of course I'm going to be different from you. You came from Pakistan, India, Zimbabwe, Timbuktu. I respect that. But you chose to come here. I was born here. And yes, there will be something called American Islam. Just like you